All right, I'm going to give you a quick little crash course on applying a polyurethane finish. All right, so we have two types of polyurethane. This is a oil-based polyurethane. So that means you get it on your hands, it doesn't come off very good. So you have to put, the best way to do that, it's kind of crazy, but you get sawdust on your hands where it's sticky, and then rub them back and forth, and then wash your hands good, and it helps take off the polyurethane. But you don't want to get this on your clothes. You don't want to get this on your hands or anything. Polyurethane helps protect the wood, okay, from moisture, because even if the wood isn't outside, it still can collect moisture from the air. It also helps protect it from scratches, and it helps make it look pretty, okay? It gives it like a nice glow to it, make sure your project look a lot nicer. So I like to use polyurethane. We also have a water-based kind, which is usually in a dark can, and that one does wash off better. So if you get that on your hands, it washes off better. It's a really white in color. When you open the lid, it's really white, but then after you put it on, it dries clear. This is kind of an amber color, but after you put it on, it dries clear for the most part. It does have a tiny tint to it. A couple things to remember: before you put any polyurethane at all, you really need to do a good job sanding, because the polyurethane actually amplifies scratches. So any scratches that go across the grain, you're going to see it better once you put a finish on. So you really need to inspect your project at all different angles. If there's any glue that's in the way, the glue will repel the polyurethane. So if you have a big glob of glue on your project, this will not stick to it, and it's going to make the glue look even worse. So you need to get the glue off. You need to sand your whole project going with the grain direction. You need to get off any sharp edges, any pencil marks. Like, I'm always amazed at how many students, I'm like, you didn't even erase your pencil marks. They have all these pencil marks on their project, and they'll put the polyurethane over, and then it's harder to get them off because the polyurethane protects the pencil marks. So take some time before you put the polyurethane on. Take your time and make your project the best it can get before you put the polyurethane on. Once you put the polyurethane on, you can sand between coats. Sometimes I'll find a bad spot. I'll find a piece of, little spot of glue I missed, and I'll sand that right back down to the bare wood again, and then I'll have to touch up the polyurethane, where that occurred. So a lot of students struggle opening the cans, first of all. Please don't destroy the can, because every day we want to put the lid on. If we don't put the lid on at the end of the class, there becomes like a layer of ice in here, and then that layer of ice breaks up and it gets on our project, so it puts debris on our projects. When you open a can, you work your way around the outer edge with a screwdriver or a key. So I just use the edge of my house key, and I work around that, and then eventually the lid will pop off. To put the can lid back on, honestly, I usually just set it on the floor, and then I step on it evenly, so then it goes back on. If you take a hammer and just start pounding on it, a lot of times you dent it too bad, and then the lid won't go back on right. Also, before you put the lid on, you have to take your brush and you work your way around the lip so there's not a huge puddle on there. So a couple common mistakes that students do wrong with polyurethaning is, one, they don't brush with the grain. Just seems natural to me that you'd want to brush in the grain direction, but if you go across the grain, then you have all these weird brush marks. So, really simple. I have a polyurethane board right here. This one has stain and polyurethane. I'm going to be going this way with the grain, okay? I'm not going to go this way because it won't soak into the board, and you'll have all these crazy brush marks. It looks terrible. So you're going to go this way with the grain, and then hopefully that will blend it in really nice. You want to put on a nice thin coat, okay? I have students that dip this brush in to the can, the whole way, and it's just soaking with polyurethane, dripping all over their clothes and all over their hands. And then they put it on their board, and it drips off the edges, and oh man, it just looks bad. So when you dip this in the can, you're only dipping it in, a quarter inch or maybe a half inch. You're not dipping this brush all the way in up to the top of the handle. So go nice and easy when you're dipping it in the can. You don't want to get it all over. And don't try to do every surface at once. Maybe one day you just do the top, the other day you do the bottom, that kind of thing. It does take a while putting a finish on. When I build a project for somebody, like a customer, I just did this, okay? I just did a project. It took me about 40 hours to make this project. Okay, it took me 40 hours to put a finish on too. It was like 38 hours to put a finish on, 40 hours to build the project. It's crazy. It just takes a long time to do a good job on finish. So that's why when I have a student come to me and they're like, I got my finish on, I'm like, the class just started. I mean, then we only been in class for 10 minutes. I'm like, how did you get a finish on that quick? So you want to inspect, you don't want any drips. So after you put your finish on, go back around and inspect the whole thing to make sure that there's no drips, because those drips are harder to get off the next day, right? They're going to be a lot harder to get off, the next day compared to the first day. So take your time on all those, those little details. It's going to make your project a lot better. So another thing with finishing is preparing your space, okay? You want to, have a nice open space, maybe clear off a table, be considerate of other people's projects that are around. There's these little triangles that are laying around. They're called painter's pyramids that you can kind of use to pick your project up off the table. You can use a little chunk of scrap wood to take the board off the table. There's all these different ways you can keep the board off, the table, so it doesn't get dust on it. Then it needs to sit. I'll have kids carry their project around the shop. There's all this dust flying around and all the dust is sticking to the project. And it really needs to sit for like overnight before you go and, take the project home or move it in any way. Then between coats, so I'll usually put 2 to 3 coats of this on. And like I said, thin coats. You're going to sand just a little bit between coats with some fairly fine sandpaper, some sandpaper that's really worn down, and you're going to look for any drips. If you have drips, you have to get that off before the next, the next coat. So get that drip off, and then you'll have your next coat, and that will really help out. So there's a couple quick things on finishing. Remember, you're trying not to get on your hands, you're trying not to get on your clothes, you're trying not to get on other people's projects. You're trying not to waste it. This can is like $13. So they're very expensive. So sometimes I don't even do polyurethane because it's so expensive. And then we go through a lot of brushes. So the brushes, we'll probably just replace these at the end of the day, but we're not going to get out a whole bunch because we'll probably just have a couple people putting a finish on at a time, because the finish room is really crowded, really small, and it takes a minute to clear things off. There's not a lot of room in there. So we'll probably just, in one day, we'll probably get like maybe 6 or 8 kids will get a finish on for the whole class period. And we'll just use a couple brushes that we'll dispose of. So these are supposed to go in the red can that says flammable. And so polyurethane isn't quite as flammable as stain, but just something that we're trying to do. Good housekeeping measures. All right, that was a crash course on putting a finish on. I know I hit it really quick, and you're just going to have to experience a little bit. If you just use those couple tips I gave you, it's going to work out a lot better for you. So you're looking for drips. You're going to check it out again in a minute. You're going to do a good job sanding and getting it ready even before you put your finish on. You're trying to put a finish on with the grain as you sanded with the grain direction. And you're trying to not dip your brush in too far to where it gets, really messy. All right, have a great day.